Super interesting. My first question, I'm wondering, as you mentioned so many of those innovators coming to your office, and what do you think have been the limiting factors of implementing those innovative solutions in the education system?
Oh, good question, and it goes right to the end of my talk.
Yeah.
I think the real problem is that they don't come together with the right team. A lot of the Edtech solutions were created by people that had been successful in tech industry in the United States, and one was, of course, one of a school that was created by one of the Google tech billionaires that made a lot of money because he created the Gmail for Google. And he decided, oh, I know everything about building a school. And he went out and he raised $100 million from all his buddies. And I went to meet with him because Scott McNeely, who I'd worked with, asked me to meet with him because he'd put some money in this. And I got there and I said, well, where's your educator? You're building a school and you have nobody sitting at this table that knows anything about education. And I said, where's your business person? You were a software designer. You happen to be at the right place at the right time with a great software product. But where's your team? So innovation will only occur. And I ask those people that question when they come to my office.
Okay. Well, I partly agree. Partly, I see also the public sector and the kind of funding models of the education sector playing a role. But funding can be, both ways. It can come from the public sector and also from investors. Do you think something should or could be different in these fields as well?
No, I'm actually saying, I think we agree, we don't disagree. I think there's multiple ways to raise money, and it does come from foundations, from government, from corporation, from investors. I think the ideal is for you to look at where the match is between the type of funder and where you're going to get your funding. It doesn't mean that you can't. In the US, I always ask an entrepreneur, are you a nonprofit or are you a for-profit? And that really impacts how you will raise money. But why can't you be a hybrid? And investors are now considering people that are coming to them in hybrid models and saying, I'm going to go after funding to do research from traditional foundations that fund research. I'm going to go after the growth of my company from investors that want equity. And you have to show that investor that his goal is to get a return, that by having money also from the public sector, I have a better chance of returning you some funding.
But have you seen some differences between European and American kind of edtech scene?
Yes, I see a lot of differences, good and bad. I think that the European Union is catching up on edtech funding. It was a kind of a dry spot. The US was ahead of it. And now I meet more and more investment funds. But even at this meeting, when I asked the investors I've met, in your portfolio, how many edtech companies do you have? Very few of them have mentioned more than one or two. But I do see that they're realizing that edtech is not something that just services schools or universities. Edtech is something that services every individual and every company in this meeting, because you can't create a new product and not have learning as part of how you're going to train people to use your product. Dinner the other night, I met somebody who works for a company that he told me nobody would know, and of course I didn't know it, but a big company. And he's going, his sole job is to go around and educate people about what his product does. So edtech needs to be perceived as a much broader opportunity. And now when I talk to entrepreneurs, it's not somebody telling me they have a wonderful app to teach math only. It's somebody telling me that they have a solution that's going to solve that learning problem across industries, not just in education.
I agree, but I'm wondering, there's so much has been going on with AI. You briefly mentioned it within your speech as well, but to what extent do you see that AI will start making a difference in the education system?
I think AI will have a phenomenal effect, a very positive effect. I don't think the problem is the technology. I think the problem is the culture in which we use it. And so what we need, which goes to the whole education again, we need to train teachers, we need to train corporations to understand and help their employees and their students understand how to use it. I was very early involved in when we brought calculators to schools in the United States. And for those of you that remember, either as a student or as a teacher, everybody thought if we bring calculators into the classroom, the whole world will fall apart. Nobody will learn math, nobody will know how to multiply or divide. Well, that didn't happen because we did a really good job all over the world. Once we realized that the world was, Armageddon wasn't coming, we were able to take that and build good curriculum, change the pedagogy, and think about how to teach. For example, New York City schools first said, no, you can't use ChatGPT, and they just reversed that. Why did they reverse it? Because they realized if they banned it, everybody was going to use it anyway. But more importantly than that, they realized that the problem wasn't the technology. The problem was that we had this model in our mind of how to teach writing, and they got fearful that it wouldn't work anymore. But the truth of the matter is that we were able to change writing because what do we tell students how to teach writing? The best way to teach writing is get your students to write. And the more they write, the better they are. So now, and what do? We get them to read model essays, which we think are good essays, or we get them to read, other people that have written books on essays, and we show them the difference between narrative and debate. Now, ChatGPT can do that. And then the teacher can say, all right, have the ChatGPT give me an analysis of how well you debated this topic. So it's not the technology, it's the pedagogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we proceed, by the way, use the QR code if you have any questions to Barbara. Then, we can ask those on the stage as well. But you mentioned bringing calculators to schools. So you have been working with Edtech for such a long time. What keeps you still contributing?
Sometimes I get really disappointed, and the funny story is I did my doctoral dissertation many, many years ago, and it was on how kids learn, and it was basically talking about AI. And I went back and I read my dissertation and what I had written about it and how it was going to change education. This was 47 years ago, and how it was going to change education. And then I went to ChatGPT and I asked for that. They might have just taken it from my dissertation. So it's not that I don't see EdTech as making a difference. I see that we're not learning from what has happened in the past. And innovators and entrepreneurs tend to have blinders on. And we should. We should have blinders on because we can't move fast enough if we're always worried about making something in the past. But we need to understand the past to make the change. And that's what keeps me engaged.
Yeah. But I see that how we kind of think about the education system somehow is isolated from other industries. So kind of the increase in efficiency, for example, that we have seen in, say, banking or which other sector hasn't been really the case in the education system. And what I feel is that we have kind of lost the touch of what the goal of the education system overall is. As you mentioned in your speech as well, they were discussing how big the offices should be or some other minor things. So what do you think the main KPI of the education system should be?
I think the main thing that will change, and by the way, if you ask Silicon Valley Bank that just had a crisis, I think they have the same problem, that they are in a box and they didn't see change and they didn't look at the technology appropriately and they were trying to be innovative without being considerate. I think education has gone too far to one side. They're trying to control because that's what governments do, whether it's education or public services. But I do think that what's going to change today is that we're building a whole network of people around the world that are innovative, that have the voice now. Social media, whether it's good or bad, has changed the power that teachers have to influence what happens in schools. And it's when you read good stories, and bad, but when you read good stories about it, we're going to have the opportunity to have powerful voices. And I think in my recent book on innovators, one of the things that came through was that women return more money on the dollar than men in startups. And it's interesting because women are finally using their voice. And they actually do run businesses better than men, but they do it because they take more calculated risk. They're more thoughtful about what they're going to do. Why do you think more men that are CEOs of company, their board of directors require them to have direct insurance on their lives? A man's more likely to jump out of that plane because he wants, because it's fun, than a woman. She might jump out of the plane. She may be, but she's going to consider all the risks and all the issues before she jumps out of the plane.
Yeah, yeah. In the book, I really loved the fact that talking about innovators, you didn't limit the book with only entrepreneurs, but also leaders from NGOs and public sector as well. I feel that for the innovation in education system to be actually implemented to the extent that it could, we should really involve public sector and NGOs as well. Do you have any great examples of what has been done in the world? Yeah.
Well, I think there's great examples of it around the world that are doing good things in their NGOs or foundations. I think there are foundations, and the Gates Foundation does great things for climate change and world health around the world. And they fund nonprofits. But recently, they set up a division that will fund for-profits now because they realize that the purpose is more important than the legal status of the company. And they get return in a different way. So there's all sorts of new social impact vehicles in the United States to get money that the investor, even if you're a nonprofit, can get a return. So, for example, there's an early childhood program using one of these vehicles that basically took the money, but then put the product through a distributor that then makes money on it. Mm-hmm. So, and everybody wins. It's a win-win.
Yes. So, coming back to the entrepreneurs, do you see that there's some things that they should do differently to kind of get these solutions to be implemented in all schools, for example?
That the entrepreneurs should implement? Just want to make sure I understand.
Yes. So, like, what I feel in my company as well is that we're kind of lacking the resources all the time. We have to kind of lobby the government, lobby the schools, like, cater the platform for all those stakeholders. However, it's this kind of lack of resources that sometimes is stifling this implementation.
Obviously, lack of resources, and that's not just Edtech that has this problem. Yeah. But I do think that there's a change occurring, and it's rapidly occurring, but it's quiet, is that we're seeing that education companies and Edtech companies, we have the ability now to show impact. So when I look at an entrepreneur and they say, well, I'm going to roll this out in country X, whatever that is, and I said, well, fine, but where's the data that shows me this product works or that has an impact? And that's going to help you get in the front door of the superintendent or the school leader or the corporation in corporate learning. So you need data. Data is really important today. And you need to figure out who's the buyer versus who the audience or the user is. So many Edtech people build a great product for children, but the buyer is the parent, not the child. So how do you sell a product to a parent is different than how you get the child to use it. So I think we're seeing a subtle, social media is a help to us, it's also a problem. But I do think you need to tell the story. And we teach at the master's program in entrepreneurship and education at Penn, we actually asked our students to develop multiple pitches. What's your pitch to that foundation? What's your pitch to that investor? Mm-hmm. What's your pitch to that principal of the school or the corporate head of learning or the university head of admissions? What's your pitch to them? And why would they use it? Remember, this is a push and pull industry. The user's going to push for your school to have it, mm-hmm. or your university to have it. The buyer's going to pull because they want those results, they want those students. So it's a matter of making sure you're not using one standard pitch to sell what you do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as an Edtech investor yourself as well, what would be the great kind of idea and solution you would like to invest right now in?
Well, I invest in 3 areas now, mm-hmm. and I've been everything from a private equity investor. I personally was an entrepreneur and took a company public on the AIM market in the UK. And I then ran a small investment fund for entrepreneurs coming through the university. And we gave 38 companies money over 5 years. We had an exit. It was a great model. I'll be glad to talk to you about anything of how to make that work so universities benefit, get a return, as well as the investor. And now I'm doing private investment, angel investment. And I look for 3 areas. I'm particularly interested in assessment across all levels of assessment. How do we assess HR? How do we assess student learning? The problem is COVID changed the way we think about learning, and we haven't changed the assessment. So in the United States, everybody's saying, oh, everybody lost a year of learning because of COVID. The math scores went down on the tests and the reading scores went down. We're testing the wrong thing. What about all the things that went up? What about all the student agency? What about the problem solving kids did? What about the engagement with the community and we're not testing for any of that. And yes, the score on that particular assessment may have said the math score went down. That's easy to correct, but we're not assessing the other things we should be. The second area that I'm particularly interested in is how do we build curriculum in a way that it's personalized, but it isn't costly to build. So much, any company that comes to me and tells me they're going to create content, I said, those are terrible business to be in. The margins are so low in building curriculum. However, how can you use the technology to reduce the cost, improve the quality, and distribute it to more people? Then I'm interested. I just invested in a company that does course creation, and I haven't before, and a company called Box Media. It develops corporate courses in a model. When she first told me she was what the price she was developing it at, and the technology she was using, I said, no way. And she kept coming back, and I finally looked at it in more detail, and I had a conversation with the CTO, and it works, believe me. So I look for things that are cost creation in new ways, innovative ways. And the third area that I'm particularly interested in is teacher professional development. How do we improve teachers? What can the technology do to help them? I'm involved in a company that works with teacher engagement to assess their engagement with students. I have a whole portfolio of companies, and I only invest in 5 companies at a time. And when that company either gets buys or has a next round, I don't invest again because I really am a early stage investor. I like the edginess of startups. And then I talk to a lot and mentor a lot of companies. So those are my 3 areas I think are important for changing education today.
Yes, but now imagining that all those investments will bear wonderful fruits and we have amazing changes and like innovation in the education system actually implemented as well. What do you see the 22nd century education system to look like or feel like?
What will education look like in 2020, 2030?
Well, yeah, 22nd century, so yeah.
For this, well, I invest in companies because I hope it will change education for the future. My children laugh when I tell them I'm spending my money as an investor rather than gambling it in Las Vegas because I'm probably going to lose about the same amount of money. But I think that education in the future, sadly, will not change much. Think about education over the past hundreds of years. How different is education from 100 years ago in schools today? I think what will change and will have an impact is education, hopefully, in my opinion, schools will go away in the way we know them. We will have a whole different system for learning. We will create an environment where kids use their communities to learn in. My children were in a program in high school which seemed very innovative at the time, and I wished it was more replicated. But they studied, everybody has to take a government course in the US. You think they'd learn something, but based on our Congress, they haven't learned anything. But they learned, take a government course. So her course was solely held in the courts in the city, in the legal system in the city. They had things to read and to write, but they never listened to the teacher lecture about the course. They met with the judges, they went to the court system, they went to the prisons, they looked at the government system. So I hope that education in the future, the schools are a community, not a building.
Yes, completely agreed on that. And now to kind of wrap it up, what would be your call to action to innovators, investors, and also policymakers in the room so we could bring this vision to life?
Take risks, because if you don't take risks, we'll never see change. But I think my biggest advice is network, network, network. Don't work in a silo. Talk to every EdTech investor, talk to every EdTech company, because we have to learn to collaborate. We're building these wonderful solutions in a silo. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, I tell them, find the right partner, because how many people can that principal or that corporate learning officer or that university president or that learning game talk to? There's thousands of EdTech startups now. I just was at a conference where 3,000 entrepreneurs from Latin America were at. And then if any of you have gone to GSV in California every year, there were 8,000 people there, and all the investors and entrepreneurs. So collaborate, because the whole will be better by taking the parts and bringing them together. So network, network, network.
But policymakers.
What?
Like this is something that I understand about investors and innovators. But is there anything particular you would like to say to those policymakers and people working in the public sector who are unfortunately pulling the strings through the funding?
True. I don't have the answer to that. But I do know that the more people you talk to and the more things you try to do, and you're doing it with your company, with Edmis, you are changing the way we think about who teachers are. You're thinking about the way we deliver courses. You are expanding the school into the community by what you do. So and now people have to look at it. Another story was when I went to India. I visited a school that was training preschool teachers. And she wasn't accredited, but she was putting these taking women from the poor areas of the city. She was bringing them to daycare centers, training them on the job, and putting them into these daycare centers. And they were phenomenal results. Finally, the government came to her and said, we like what you're doing. We will accredit you, and now we want you to do this in bunches more schools. So keep pushing, keep talking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the panelists. Thank you one more time, and give it a bigger round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.